broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for attending. My name is Mike Weaver, and I'm one of the product owners here at Quadrotech. I oversee our email migration and PST elimination products. Today, our topic is automating, orchestrating, and integrating with Azure Logic Apps. Before we get started, there are just a couple of things to run through. All lines are currently muted and will be throughout the webinar. If you have questions, feel free to send them to us using the questions feature on the right-hand toolbar. This session is being recorded and a link will be shared with all registered attendees in the next day or so. So thank you for joining. I'm happy that you could join us today talking about Azure Logic Apps. It's something that we've been using a fair amount here with some of our migration solutions, and I'm excited that we can share with what we're doing and how you can actually use it in some of the other aspects of your jobs, even outside of migrations and other aspects. Today, this is our agenda. We're going to go over what is Logic Apps. In that section, I'm also going to talk about Flow, because it's commonly a question is, what's the difference between Flow and Logic Apps? We're going to talk about how you use it. So some people have not been exposed to it, so we're going to go in how you get access to it. We're going to talk about good use cases for Logic Apps as well, and some basic good use cases and some advanced. And then we're going to actually hop into the Azure portal. We're going to look at an existing one that I have and also look at some of the templates and things that are available to go ahead and do it to help get you started. And we'll wrap it up with some best practices and also how we use Logic Apps here at Quadrotech as part of our projects. Again, if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to use the questions feature in the right-hand toolbar, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end. Before we hop into Azure, I'm just going to briefly go over Quadrotech. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what we do here at Quadrotech, we've been around since 2011. Our history is mainly in the migration space of email ecosystems, and I'll talk about the product sets that we have on the next slide briefly. And we also have moved more into Office 365 lifecycle management with the addition of some monitoring and reporting tools that we also have. We have a global presence. We have offices all over the globe, so there's likely a Quadrotech representative near you, whether it's in North America, EMEA, Asia Pac, wherever you happen to be. We are likely there and able to help you with your projects. We have access to 3 Microsoft MVPs, and we have built up quite a few competencies inside the Microsoft Partner Network. These are the main product sets that we have here at Quadrotech, and these are our 3 main goals: modernize, grow and adapt, and optimize. For modernize, it's our migration products. Mailbox Shuttle is our mailbox migration product, which is typically tied in with Archive Shuttle. We have a really nice workflow engine that I'm going to reference a few times in the webinar today between our Mailbox Shuttle to Archive Shuttle. Mailbox Shuttle moves mailboxes from on-prem Exchange into Office 365, while Archive Shuttle is our legacy archive migration tool for systems like Enterprise Vault and EMC Source 1 into Office 365 or Exchange on-prem. We have PST Flight Deck, which is our really cool PST elimination or PST upgrade product that we have here at Quadrotech that does automation for migrating user PSTs while they're open and read-only, and will take care of corruption and passwords and all the things that hang us up, and move that also into Office 365 or Exchange on-prem. We have Grow and Adapt, which is Quadrotech Cloud Commander. This is our tenant-to-tenant migration product to help support organizations, mainly for mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, or if they had multiple tenants at the beginning and trying to consolidate down to get efficiencies. And finally, we have Optimize, and this is where our reporting, security management, and self-service tools come in. For reporting and security, we have Radar Reporting, formerly known as Cogmotive. So some of you might be more familiar with that brand name. And it's a really robust reporting platform that we have on top of the Office 365 toolset to be able to do all sorts of things like delegating reports down. It's really quick and reactive, so you can very quickly get the data you need. And there's also a audit component. So we actually make sense out of all the audit log data so that you can really focus on what you need to see there. And finally, we have Quadrotech Autopilot, which is our delegated admin product. A really good example use case of this is being able to delegate tasks down to non-admins. So for example, if you need to reset multi-factor authentication because there happens to be an Azure MFA outage at the time or whatever is needed, that sometimes is a global admin feature, and you don't want to push that down to or give global admin out to everybody. So you can enable your help desk to be able to manage those functions. So if you see anything here that we can help with or you have questions on, feel free to contact us after the webinar. But let's talk about the real reason we're here. So I come from industry, a large Fortune 50 enterprise in the States, and we really, as technologists, and most of us here probably are in this boat, really want to automate as much as possible. And the good news for us is as we have had cloud adoption, we kind of have gotten standards, which has been nice. The challenge is we're still getting multiple standards and multiple cloud systems. And in some cases, our automation tools that we used to have that we could write on-prem and control because it was inside our walls, it was easier to write automation. So suddenly, if we had multiple systems that we had to touch, so, back in the day, if we had Microsoft Exchange and a BlackBerry Bez server, we could write some really cool home automation tools and homegrown automation tools and do it. And most of us either had that person on our team that did that for us, or you're that person on the call today. As we've moved into all these different cloud systems, those seemingly unrelated tasks still need to be done and connected. And the situation of all these different APIs and how to secure them and how to log in and authenticate really makes automation a lot more difficult than what it used to be. And so it's deceiving when we kind of all have said, well, we've moved into Office 365, this is great, but it's amazing how many organizations have multiple options for this. So they are using Office 365 for Exchange, but they have users on Box, things like that. So that allows us, this is the need that we have, is to have a platform where we can manage these multiple platforms at once. And the other thing to note is we do automation for several reasons. One, we want to ensure it gets done. So us as humans, and really it shouldn't say humans, as us as engineers and sysadmins, we're not really good at repetitive tasks. So we put in a process that says every Monday we're going to go check this, or every week we're going to check this. And over time we forget. We miss a week here or there, and then suddenly it's not being done. So what's really nice about using automation tools like this is, and if we monitor it correctly, we ensure this stuff gets done. So employee onboarding and termination processes that are correct, which are some great examples where you can use Logic Apps here, and several other things that you just need to take care and automate and ensure it gets done, and you don't want to think about it. There's lots of opportunities here for you to be able to do it. So that's really the automation problem. And again, the key message here and the use case for Logic Apps is, although we're on Office 365 in most cases for organizations, or maybe even hybrid, it hasn't simplified. It's actually made writing our automation tools harder. When we talk about what is Logic Apps, so this is a technology that hasn't had a huge amount of adoption. There are fanatics out there, and if you really start getting into this more and more, there are some great blogs and series out there from Microsoft MVPs, and even just the MSDN library that is out there is very robust with lots of templates and guides. There's some really good videos out there, even on YouTube. Obviously, the free resources are free, so sometimes you got to be sure that it's there, and you should always test things in a lab before you just load it in. But there's lots and lots of resources. But it's a workflow automation product. And we're going to show you exactly what that means. So these are products. This concept isn't new for us as technologists. But what's different about Logic Apps is it comes loaded with a lot of different APIs and templates that are really helpful. And this is the real amazement of computing, particularly the Azure product set. The amount of items that we have access to as technologists is amazing when you look at the catalog. And we can just simply click and add, and if you're willing to pay for it, suddenly have these systems, whereas before we had to go provision these IT systems. So the Logic App system has tons of APIs and templates in it. So does Flow. And so the kind of side note here is we're going to talk about Logic Apps today, but some of the items that you may be interested in automating can be done in Flow, and that may be the right thing. So when we talk about the difference between Logic Apps and Flow, you can kind of look at it this way. Almost everything that you can do in Flow, you can do in Logic Apps. Logic Apps is kind of the big brother of the two options that you have out here. Everything you can do in Logic Apps, you can't do in Flow. And to take that even another step, Flow is great for users and power users and business users. Logic Apps is designed for developers. Us as sysadmins sometimes fall right in the middle of that. So that's where sometimes, you kind of have to look at what you're trying to do and see where you fit. And when we talk about pricing in a minute here, that's really where some of this might come into play as well, because you may push you into one of the sides. Flow is UI only. And that's okay for a lot of the use cases of automation. And this is what's been really nice. It's a great UI. It's very easy to use. It's a similar UI between Logic Apps and Flow. So, you can kind of learn on one and be able to use both. But there is a Visual Studio and code backend for Logic Apps. So you can write all this advanced code. So if there is an API or connector that doesn't fit your needs, in a lot of cases you can write it. And admittedly, here at Quadrotech, we've written a lot of items in the background as well. And that's kind of hard to do in a webinar, but there's items that we've written to help our products here. Flow, as I said, is included in some of the Office 365 SKUs. A lot of the eSKUs have it, and there's 2 levels of it. And by levels, you kind of go in. If you look at Exchange Plan 1, Exchange Plan 2, there's a similar design for Flow, and really the 2 levels that it relates to, they call them the number of runs that you have, and we'll kind of reference that later when we have that here. So Flow is based on your user license, and Logic Apps is on consumption or action. So it's really based on what the app is actually consuming. So we'll also talk about here how to make efficient pieces to ensure that you're not, charging up your account. So how do you use it? It's a billable product. So you have to have a billable subscription somewhere in order to use this long term. If you're an MSDN user and you have Azure credit with your level of MSDN, which most do, you can hop right in if you've got the cash in your account to do it. So this is how I run my personal ones. I do it in my MSDN account to actually do some monitoring of some things when I'm trying to do some development and play work. And that's exactly what MSDN is designed for. There are some trials. So if you don't have an MSDN account, there are some 30-day trials out there that you can use to get in there. So if you go out just to the Azure Logic Apps site, you can see your free trial button and go ahead and sign in with your Microsoft account and fool around with it. There are 2 cost models for it, and one that is in preview, and this is somewhat new, so some people may not be aware of it, is a fixed pricing model for built-in IC connectors. So this can be kind of an all-you-can-eat for these specific tasks. So if you fall into the category, this is what you're using, then that may be the right cost model for you. The traditional model, which I think a lot of us are probably going to fall into, are the actions and consumption. So when we're doing our custom flows here, this is what we're still running into and what we're still using for billing. It's really very cost effective. So I know I sit there and kind of be, the gloom and doom of it's consumption based and you got to be careful, but the price is pretty aggressive on it. And there's again, out on the site here, and I'll bring it up at the end, I actually have the billing information as well. So when we talk about connectors and APIs, it is a huge list, and I'm actually just going to drag the list over to show you. The list is very, very, very long of all the API and connectors. So Dynamics 365, just some of the Excel pieces, Facebook, GitHub, Gmail, GoToWebinar, which we're on now, Azure, some other aspects here, live mail, it just keeps going, 365 groups, ServiceNow, Service Bus, which we'll also talk about in here, Slack, all sorts of items that you can do here. And I'll note also in here, it also discusses some of the pieces that we'll go into here, but very, very long list of APIs that are available to you. And we'll include this in the post documentation so it's easy to find. When we talk about basic concepts, here are the 3 major concepts when we're doing this. So it's a workflow engine. These should be familiar concepts for a lot of people that have used these too. You have a trigger. So this is what sets off the logic. So this is where whatever we set, so the example I'm going to show is a Twitter monitor. Whenever someone hashtags Quadrotech, it will set off the workflow. The other aspect is a condition. So an example using that we could do is we could send it to an AI engine. So we're monitoring Twitter, send the tweet to a artificial intelligence engine and have it score and tell us if it's a positive or negative tweet. If it's positive, maybe send it to one aspect of the organizations. If it's negative, maybe it gets escalated at a higher rate and goes somewhere else. Or maybe it opens a operations ticket somewhere, things like that. And then our typical for each until terminate. So we can loop through and do certain functions as well. So what is Logic Apps good for? Basically, there is so much out there, and we're going to show the templates that's there, where it has sample workflows ready to go. There's some really good 2-3 step workflows that are just sitting there ready to go. One of the ones we're going to use today is actually just a template. So you'd be surprised as you sit here the amount of items that you can just automate today just by using a template that's out there. The example we're using today is to monitor Twitter. You can also monitor YouTube. You can also send notifications. One of the really cool aspects and template out there is actually an approval email template. So you can actually have that when that is set off, it will send an email to whatever you set in the workflow, and the person can approve or deny it. So an example of that is maybe as part of your onboarding, or this does some of your onboarding. Maybe if you're in a small organization, you're trying to build your onboarding workflow, and you may not want that to just go off. So maybe somebody a manager files a request to start a new employee, and then HR has to approve it. And once it's approved, it would kick off creating the account and doing all the provisioning that you need to do. Things like that. Really, really cool template that's part of Logic Apps. And again, employee onboarding is a really good example. From an advanced standpoint, this is where kind of the sky's the limit, and this is where some of the items we're doing here are more on the coding side of it. But you can read service bus messages. So this is what we're doing here at Quadrotech inside Quadrotech Cloud Commander has support for this, where we can read if a user migration wave goes into a failed state, we can take action. So we could open a ServiceNow ticket. So if the organization that we're moving has ServiceNow, the wave goes into a failed state, we can open a ServiceNow ticket so somebody doesn't have to go into the console to get it. So, or we can integrate in with an alerting system if they wanted to as well. We could do SNMP traps, things like that. We also have AI integration. So that's been really, we all hear the AI buzzword of everything around artificial intelligence. There is some integration into some really nice AI engines as well. And so very easily you can do that. Some of them have additional charges as well. But again, to get access to these engines that used to be really difficult, now it's just a standard item that you can purchase and put in. Including some of those AI engines are image recognition. So you can do some really interesting things there. So if you go on some of the blogs, there's some examples of auto insurance companies doing claims and taking the image. So if somebody has a car accident and you take a bunch of pictures of the car, the image recognition system will identify the hood of the car and put that in the application in a certain place. So, if the person didn't tag it or doesn't need to tag it, they just have to put their 6 photos in, and the image engine will go ahead and identify the photos and put it in. So again, some really interesting things that you can integrate in. Some items to think about. As always, we'll think about security and least access. So we are running in some cases under service accounts. So we really want to ensure that our service accounts are operating correctly, and we don't give a global admin account if it doesn't need it, that kind of activity. Always ensure that what you're putting here is least access. Everything needs monitoring and maintenance. So if this becomes a critical business item, then you really want to be sure you're monitoring it and maintaining it. So, the APIs are great, but there might be changes to them at some point, or there might be changes to the systems you're interacting with, or you may need to maintain the actual workflow. These are all things, it's basic 101, but as much as we say automation is great because you can set it and forget it, there's still always a monitoring and maintenance piece, and just because it's in Logic Apps, that doesn't take away from it. The other thing is efficiency. When you're building these, again, you want to be sure you don't have extra steps in there. It can be really problematic to just add this in, especially if you're in a consumption-based model that can add price and expense unnecessarily. It takes a little longer to run, which probably isn't really a big problem with the computing resources that we have, But again, it's just not being effective with the funds that you have. So here at Quadrotech, we can integrate Logic Apps into, like I said, we've been using it in Cloud Commander as an option to extend our migration. So a lot of people, when they think of data migration, they think all that is involved is, picking up some email and moving it from one place to the other. But in reality, there's a lot that needs to be done. When you think about the user experience and what they have, mobile device reconfiguration, and everything that migration actually touches, and all the other systems that could be involved, particularly as we talked about in the intro, all the different cloud systems, there's actually a fair amount of things that may need to happen as a user moves around. As a software vendor, we have custom code and some really good intellectual property that we built for migration, but I can't write, that long list of connectors into our products. It's just not feasible. So what we've been able to do is for our more advanced clients that have really robust workflows that they need for migration, so that the IT team can focus on the migration itself and supporting their users, we need to automate a ton of things that they have. So this is just some examples that we have is the service bus messages can kick off the migration. So when we mark a user wave as complete, we can kick off that complete workflow. So we use a lot of PowerShell scripts, which probably isn't a surprise here, but there's also, again, other API calls that we need to do here. And sometimes we need to work with mail routing vendors to change mail routing. There's certain options and APIs, whether if it's not inside as a connector, there's things that we can integrate in with Logic Apps to give us additional pieces that we can automate. If a user goes into a failed state, then we can open a ticket in their system so that it's not a surprise, so we can proactively get to that user. So sometimes we have these teams that travel around for the migrations and in larger projects and large organizations. When they're migrating location by location, we could open a ticket for that local location so that they know, okay, I've got 4 users out of 500 that are going to have an issue, and I know in advance and I can be proactive, things like that. I admit a lot of what we do in Logic Apps we use custom code for, so we're not going to be able to go really deep into that aspect, but the concept is still repeatable. And as I said, the libraries out there inside Logic Apps, there's tons of examples. So if there's a template that doesn't fit your need, there is likely a Logic App guru that can help you, or there's certainly video and documentation on it as well. So let's look at a basic item here. So what I'm going to show you an example of is a Logic app that I've created that whenever hashtag Quadrotech is posted, it emails me. And this is one that I actually do use. I will admit, and hopefully I don't offend anyone here, I am not the best Twitter person. It's just not in my social media repertoire of items that I follow. So I'm really not good at keeping up on it, but there are some people on it that I really do care about and want to monitor, and also I want to keep track of what we're doing here at Quadrotech. So it's always good to see the Quadrotech channel for me. So I use this as a monitor to monitor the key people and the key posts that I want to see or key companies that I want to see, and I just automate emails. And some people may think that's an odd workflow, but certainly for me, as someone who isn't a constant Twitter user, it can be quite helpful. So this is the demo that I have, and so this is the Azure portal, and I've got all my resource groups on the left. I've got some of my other demos that I have here at Quadrotech, and it's this simple. And I'm going to create one from scratch in a minute here for you as well. But I've got a billable subscription, and it's my MSDN billable subscription here, and these are all the pieces of it. But I can quickly go into Logic App and show you what just this very simple 2-step workflow looks like. For those of you that are familiar with Azure resources, on the left-hand side, I've got all the items that I would expect, access control, and everything that I am used to seeing. There's a lot of consistency out here. But the 2 things here in the development tools is there's Logic App Designer, which is the actual UI portion that we're going to hop in today, and there's also some code views. I could, if I wanted to, use Visual Studio instead and be able to get in and do that if I really wanted to. Oh, we're going to open Logic App Designer. So again, this is very, very similar. We could have conditions in here to separate things, but this is just a very simple two-step. And again, there's all these templates that I'll bring up in a minute here. But we have, so I've got whenever Quadrotech, and I also have if Quadrafam, because that's another hashtag that Quadrotech. If these go in and every 60 minutes I have a checking, it's going to go ahead and send an email. So in this case, I'm using just my own server that I have that I use. But you could use Outlook email, you could use Office 365 mail, whatever you wanted to do, and you can edit the body and subject, and so you can kind of keep track of whatever you want to do here. But as you can see, it's very, very flexible. There's all sorts of options. You can add comments and setting, whatever you need to do. I'm going to go ahead and, so if this was running, which I do have it stopped right now, every 60 minutes it'll go off and I get my nice little Twitter overview to my email. But I'm going to go ahead and create one from scratch just to show you the options that we have. So you have to go into a resource group that you want to have that's billable and add a Logic app, and you just search for it just like that. And create. Demo test. Just be sure that I put it in the right place here. And I just hit create. And I'm going to go into Logic App Designer. And so this is what I was mentioning, all these great. There's even a video example integrated in, which again, I can't say enough positive things on how these portals have transformed over the years. It's really been quite helpful. But we've got all these really common triggers and templates right at the top, and they just go on and on and on. So let's see if we see any that are kind of interesting. So maintenance jobs, deleting old Azure blobs. See what we got, so if you want to take, instead of my problem where I don't monitor Twitter, I can move it from Twitter to Slack if I wanted to. All sorts of options that are here. Post a file out on SharePoint. These are some of the examples of third party, so you can go into a MailChimp list and even notification systems. So if I do blank, it's probably going to be easier. That will bring up all of the different options that I have. And this is where, again, we can get pretty complex or pretty simple. So we get the most common items up at the top here. Service bus is what we use to read our service bus messages. But we can do all sorts of workflows and decisions. All the different connectors here. Depending on what you are, so if you're in the coding space, you can use your Azure DevOps pieces or Box, or again, these options are just absolutely endless. And so for those of you that don't have an MSCN subscription, I really would encourage you to do the trial to actually go out and fool around with it. And again, and there's even SAP integration as well for those that have those platforms. So again, fool around with it. Very simple. It's all drag and drop in that designer, as I showed in the other page, and you can really do quite a lot of powerful things. Some final tips when working with this technology: have fun with it. As I said, obviously do it in a lab, which is the other piece. So that's where maybe you have a second account that you go in and do your lab and free trial with. these are automated systems. It's like when you're in PowerShell and you delete something and you don't get a full warning. You really have to be careful, because once you write it, it's going to do what it tells you to do. And sometimes you have unintended consequences. So just do be very careful. These are when you're logging in and putting in accounts. Again, we talked about least access, but sometimes you're putting in some powerful accounts here, so you do want to use some best practices there. Always review the documentation, read the manual, ensure that things are correct. It's very well documented. And probably the best thing to start is starting with those templates that I was showing. So you can very easily hop in today and start getting familiar with using some of those templates. If you have applications in your environment that are using some of those other connectors, certainly reach out to your application team, see if they've got a lab environment that you can fool around with. So if you're, getting requests from your application teams to automatically do certain functions, you might be able to write an automation workflow working on it together. But again, always test it and use proper test environments for it. So before we go into Q&A, and this is a good time to ask questions on your right-hand toolbar, and we actually do have a fair amount of time today. Microsoft Ignite, the tour is going on. If one of these cities is near you, we will be there. I'll be actually opening in Berlin next week and closing in Mumbai at the end. So if you're in any of these, please let us know, and we're happy to help. And we'll include this link as well, where you can actually register. So if you can't make it to the one in Orlando, they have launched this really nice Ignite the Tour. So it's for some opportunities to get some training. Laura, do we have any questions that we want to address?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, we did have a few come in. Jason is asking, how expensive is it to run, and do I need enterprise SKUs to run it? I think you touched on that a bit, but.
Yeah, so why don't we review that? So for Flow, it's included in most of the enterprise SKUs, but for Logic Apps, it's consumption based. And so right in the pricing, it's billed by consumption. And the only thing is you need a billable subscription. And as long as you have a billable subscription and an Azure account, I suppose you don't even need a Azure AD license or anything. You can create a Logic app. So very simply, and that's why the trials work very well, because you don't need all that infrastructure to do it. So you don't need an enterprise SKU necessarily, but you just need something to pay the bills. And again, you can review the charges that are out there on the pricing tab.
Thank you. And then Nicole has asked, what are common items you run in migrations outside of PowerShell commands?
So that's a good question. So in our migration workflow, probably the two most common things that we focus on is mobile device reconfiguration. So when we're moving users' email primarily, it's entertaining. The Outlook on their workstation, if that's not working, that's fine. But if we don't have email on our hip for 5 minutes, that's a help desk call. So some automation around the mobile device management solutions we've used. Sometimes when they aren't, if they have a API, we've been able to use that API and get that working. The other aspect is mail routing. So if, especially in the tenant-to-tenant projects, some of the limitations that are in the having the SMTP domains, you actually have to do some mail routing. We have some capabilities that we can work with your mail routing vendor outside of Exchange Online protection to be able to automate some of those pieces.
All right, I don't see anything else coming in at this point.
All right. Well, fair enough. If there are any other questions that come in or you think of after the webinar, feel free to use the Contact Us feature, and we're happy to share the knowledge that we have here. But go forth and enjoy the platform. It's something that we've really enjoyed using here at Quadrotech. Thank you for joining the webinar.